Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Since devblog season has begun, another leak list has come out, which confirms a lot of the stuff that we've seen in the previous leak lists, but also adds some new stuff. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to recap all of the stuff that is in this leak list that we've already seen before, because there's not really much point in going over it again, but also we'll be looking at a bunch of new stuff that has been added. The interesting thing about this leak list is it also talks about vehicles that might be delayed, so I'll make sure to mention that, and then also at the same time it shows a bunch of updates to previous vehicles that are already in the game, so we'll have a look at that too. So, as always, if you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get into the new vehicles and see what this next update has to offer. So for vehicles that we've already looked at in other league lists, there is a metric ton of them, so looks like a lot of that stuff was true. For America, we have the A10C, which is of course the upgraded version of the A10A that we have in the game. You also have the T1E1 90mm, which was just announced today, so there you go, not a surprise. Then the Tennessee, the BB43, this of course being the large ship that we talked about previously. Only 2 of its class were made, so it would be really cool to see it. Other vehicles are the 9A33 OSA. This is actually there for Germany, for Russia, and also for Italy in the form of a Romanian 9A33 OSA, further confirming that Romanian vehicles will come to the Italian tech tree. The other thing though is for the 9A33 OSA, for the German one it says that it might be delayed, so they'll come for the other nations but maybe not for Germany. The other vehicle, the Boxer, has been confirmed in the leak list, same with the Puma S1, so it looks like Germany is going to be getting a lot of light vehicles to run around and have a bit of fun with. For Russia, you have the Su-24M, which is of course the Su-24 we talked about, the one which is I suppose kind of similar to the F-105 from the American side of things, a bit more modern though. The KV-1 1942 in the standard tech tree, this was the most produced KV-1, talked about it a few times. The other vehicles that have also been talked about, the Amagi for the Japanese. The Amagi is a battle cruiser that was never finished, and because of the naval treaties was supposed to be changed into a aircraft carrier. Never got to that point though, because the earthquake where it was getting kind of remodeled hit and it was kind of destroyed. So this should be a battle cruiser, but maybe it's something else, depending on if some other stuff has a similar name. The 2 J10s also turn up, the J10 and the J10A for China. The JF-17 is also here, which is the Pakistani Chinese vehicle that looks very similar to an F-16, but it is actually labeled as a squadron vehicle for China, which would be really cool to see. Then we have the JH7, which was an upgraded variant of the one we have in the tech tree. This is actually labeled as a premium, so that will probably be coming in. Another premium for China as well, in the form of the MBT 2000. So a lot of big high-tip premium stuff for China. And then also the Antelope C1 ADM, which is the vehicle which is very similar to the Chaparral, but uses the Sky Sword missile instead for the Taiwanese. You also have the KV-1A for Sweden in the form of the Finnish vehicle. This is the same as the 1942, but it's going to be a G premium, which sucks. And I think overall we can all agree that is awful. And hopefully it comes into the tech tree, but at the moment it's not looking like it. For Russia, you also have the ZSU-23-4M2. This is a Shilka, obviously, very similar to the ones that we already have, but this one doesn't have a radar. This is the Afghanistani Shilka, basically the one which Russia used, or the Soviets used, in Afghanistan to pretty much, let's just say, suppressive fire a bunch of areas of it. So this was more used against infantry and not aircraft, but I'm sure in War Thunder it will be mainly used as aircraft. It still has the same guns, the 23mm on it. The only difference between it and the standard Shilka is it just doesn't have the radar system. Japan also gets two light vehicles which are incredibly modern. You have the CTWV ICV and also the CTWV RCV. Now the CTWV is actually the Common Tactical Wheeled Vehicle. If you actually have a look at Japanese kind of modern vehicles, they all have very specific names, especially when it comes to prototypes. So the ICV is an infantry combat vehicle, where the RCV is the reconnaissance and combat vehicle. So one of them is designed for general firepower, the other one is designed as an IFV to be able to carry troops. They both have 30mm on them, but they can have different weapons as they go around, and they're both kind of designed to replace the Type 89, which obviously is quite old in its service. Both of these vehicles have the 30mm Mark 44 Bushmaster 2, which means that they can run around with a good old autocannon, which is stabilized very similar to a lot of other vehicles in the game, and at the same time have the 570 horsepower Mitsubishi diesel engines. One of the also interesting things about a lot of Japanese vehicles, especially the modern era, they're very much looking for commonality of parts to make, repairs or also production way more streamlined, which is why these things have very similar engines, very similar transmissions, very similar guns, and very similar stuff. The only difference is the ICV can carry 8 additional passengers in it, whereas the crew of the RCV is just the crew itself for fire support. The armor, of course, isn't great. It should have thermals. They're very modern vehicles. They'll be able to do everything that other vehicles with a 30mm Bushmaster can do. For Britain, you have the HMS Warspite. Now, all during the time where the Queen Elizabeth was talked about, it didn't really make a lot of sense for me that they were actually going to add the Queen Elizabeth. Because even though it's called the Queen Elizabeth class battleship, and the Queen Elizabeth is the, obviously, namesake of that class, the more famous vehicle from that class is the Warspite. If you ever talk to anybody when it comes to British naval history, one of the vehicles they'll bring up over and over and over again is the Warspite and what it was able to do during the First World War and obviously the Battle of Jutland and the Second World War too. This is a very similar vehicle, at least in terms of how it's designed compared to the Queen Elizabeth, but its story and its history is completely different compared to it, which is why it's much more interesting. It has 4 twin 15-inch guns, which obviously will pack a punch, a bunch of 6 inches on it, and 3-inch guns, and torpedo tubes, and since it survived the First World War, and had the interwar period, and the Second World War, guess what? It will have a bunch of modifications on it. Another thing that is also interesting about the Warspite, why it may be relevant to other people from around the world, is because it was one of the vehicles that was actually hit by the German glider bombs and pretty badly damaged, kind of showing that those things could be successful in the Italian or kind of Mediterranean theatre. Another thing I also didn't mention about the Warspite is it's supposed to be an event vehicle, so probably won't come into the tech tree, but we'll see what happens. One of the big thrusts of this leak, which is actually really cool, is kind of a subtree being added to Germany, and the subtree being Switzerland. So you have the F5E for Switzerland, which will be in the German tech tree. Obviously, we already have the F5E in a few different iterations in the game, in the Japanese, Chinese, and American tech tree. So this will just be an extra one. Then you have the FA-18C in the German tech tree in Swiss colours. Switzerland FA-18. I would be incredibly surprised if they do this. It does say that it might be delayed, so that is something to look at. And then also the P-16. The P-16 is the only Swiss vehicle here. Obviously, the other two are American, but it is a ground attack jet fighter. It looks very similar to the kind of trainer aircraft that America farmed out to everybody else, but they built a few of them to see if they would work, and obviously they did, but at the same time it didn't really go anywhere. It had 2 30mm cannons, it had access to a bunch of rockets, but really nothing else. The coolest thing about this is this actually used an Armstrong Siddeley turbojet engine, so that gave it quite a bit of oomph, meaning that it could move around at 1100 kilometers an hour. So you're looking at a pretty light aircraft which has pretty decent offensive armament, but not great ground capabilities, which is probably why they didn't really decide that they were going to go after that. The interesting thing as well is it was replaced by a vehicle that we already have in the game, which is the Swiss Hunter. So they decided to go for that one instead. So yeah, looks like a Switzerland subtech tree will be coming to Germany in the form of its aviation. We also have another Kfir for the Israelis. We have the Kfir C10. The C10 specifically was for export, so this one could actually be a kind of interesting one for Israel because it might have a bunch of different weapons on it, depending on the way that they go for it. The major upgrades over the other Kfirs, though, is more not really upgrade, but an adaptation, giving it a different radar and also giving it other capabilities in the cockpit. So this is just more of kind of a side grade of a Kfir compared to the ones that we already have, like the C7, for example, that's around the place. This one will be very similar to that. It might just get access to different weapon systems based on which one they actually pick, which would be kind of nice. For Britain, we have another really cool South African vehicle, and Britain over the last period has got some really cool stuff from South Africa, and this will be another one, the Superhind. The Superhind, of course, being a massive upgrade to the standard Hind, the Mi-24, and they have been able to do a bunch of different stuff to it, and basically completely replacing it, making it a new vehicle. One of the coolest things is actually it uses pretty much full South African weaponry, which is pretty awesome. It uses the 20mm Vector F2 autocannon in it, and also it uses the Ingwe, the ZT3 anti-tank laser-guided missiles that you may know from the ZT3A2, which is in the ground tech tree for Britain. The vehicle is lighter, faster, better equipped, better internals, better everything than the standard Hind. The South Africans did a full upgrade package on this thing, and it is fantastic to see coming to the game. There's also a list of other changes, mainly to aircraft, but not only, to stuff which is already in the game. So, for example, the AVA-B will get an updated pilot model, which is something they talked about in the roadmap. Other stuff which is getting updated pilot models is the AVA-B Plus, obviously, but a bunch of other vehicles are getting updated models. So the M41A1 for America, but also for Japan are getting updated models, so they'll probably look a lot nicer. And also, since the Bulldog is one of those which is farmed out to other nations, means that we're probably going to see more Bulldogs coming in for other nations. K52 as well is getting an updated model for some reason. I thought it was generally pretty good, but obviously not. And also, the ZTZ99A is getting an updated model, probably because they're bringing in a new MBT 2000. The T64 series of vehicles and T80s are getting a buff in terms of its turning speed, so maybe this is the first start of a new look at what maybe regenerative steering might be in War Thunder, something that's always kind of talked about in that way. The name is getting fatter. It's now going to be 64 tons, so it's a bit chunky, and a lot of random different helicopters are being able to slave their air-to-air missiles to the HMD. So, for example, the UH Tiger for Germany. You also have the Royvalk and the Tigers for France, which will be able to do this. The Type 81C will get an additional crew member chilling out, and also at the same time there is a bunch of other stuff that is going to be coming in, including the AH-1Z AGM-114K coming in. So basically a new updated Hellfire for the kind of, is it the Marine Cobra, I believe it is, the H-1Z, and the F-104C, instead of having 2 AIM-9Bs, will have access to 4 AIM-9Bs instead, which means it will probably finally go up in BR, and what should have happened a long, long time ago, but c'est la vie, we will see. So that's the league list. There's a lot of new stuff. I'm sure we'll see many of it over the next period of time. Let me know what you think about it, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shea, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem, Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.